How about a little final review for the exam? This is going to be a simple, I'm going to give you some questions. I'm going to ask you to pause, and then we'll give you some answers. This is basic content review. Okay, so let's talk about first AP comparative government basics. All right. Why don't you tell me the difference between empirical versus normative, correlation versus causation? What is the components? What are the components of HDI? What is the Gini index? What index deals with transparency? What's the difference between GDP and GDP per capita? There are four types of primary legitimacy, and what's the difference between federal and unitary? Why don't you pause for a moment, fill these out, and we'll give you the answers. Okay, welcome back. Here are the answers. Number one, empirical is facts, normative is values based opinions. Number two, correlation versus causation. Correlation is variables might have to do something with each other. Causal effects are A actually caused B. Um, you had something like A definitively created B to actually happen. HDI is the Human Development Index. It measures education through years of schooling, life expectancy, and GDP per capita. Gini Index measures economic inequality. The Transparency Index is the same thing as the Corruption's Perception Index from Transparency International. It measures corruption. GDP, of course, is the value of all things produced, which measures economic growth. Per capita, you divide that amongst the population, which measures the average, the wealth of the average citizen. And then there are four types of legitimacy: of your traditional legitimacy, which over time, um, people have been around for a long time, and therefore the tradition uh, ingrains itself in society. Charismatic legitimacy, the cult of personality around a leader. Rational legal legitimacy, that idea that laws grant legitimacy, like policy effectiveness, that things get done. And then finally, economic growth and economic legitimacy, primarily like a place like China. And finally, federal government is where you have shared powers between a central government and regional governments. Those powers are protected, and then unitary government, all power comes from the central government, and they can, of course, take that away. Next one, why don't you tell me the difference between quantitative versus qualitative data? What are the PALs, and then define them, please? What's the difference between a change in government and change in regime? What about rule of law versus rule by law? What does Freedom House do? What's the primary type of authority around the world? What's the difference between a head of state and a head of government, and the difference between a civil right and a civil liberty? Why don't you pause, and we will come back. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Qualitative and quantitative. Obviously, quantitative is numbers-based data, and then qualitative is things like evidence, like pictures and testimony, and things that are really difficult to actually measure. All right. Uh, PALs are, of course, power, which is the ability to rule; authority, which is the right to rule; legitimacy, people's belief they have the right to rule; and sovereignty, absolute power within your own border. What's the difference between a change in government and a change in regime? A change in government is when like people and parties actually change. A change in regime is you have actually a systemic change. Like you go from a democratic government to an authoritarian government, where it's not just people and party, like the entire structure and the system changes. Rule of law is, of course, the law applies to everyone, including the government. Rule by law is the government basically decides how and when to apply the law. Freedom House measures the democratic institutions within a country. The primary type of authority around the world is some kind of constitution, written set of rules, a charter. A head of state is the symbolic representation of the state, usually seen around the world. A head of government is the policy-making leader that governs the state. A civil right is the government creating something that's like equality based, like the right to vote or free public education for everyone, versus your basic fundamental rights and freedoms, which are civil liberties. Okay, what is civil society? What is political socialization? What's the difference between a presidential and a parliamentary form of government? If we were to take all the countries and rank them in terms of free media, how would you do that? All the AP6 countries. What are cleavages, and what is judicial, executive, and legislative power? Why don't you pause here, and then we'll come right back. Okay, civil society, of course, is groups of people not in government, non governmental organizations of people that actually have some kind of political agenda. Political socialization is the process of developing our political attitudes. The presidential versus parliamentary forms of government. In a presidential government, legislative and executive are separate and voted in separately, versus parliamentary, executive and legislative are fused. Remember that the legislative gets voted in by the voters, and then the majority party chooses who the executive is. Free media ranking. We would go UK is the freest, then Nigeria, Mexico, Iran, Russia, and China are in terms of overall ability to access, lack of censorship, and that kind of thing. That's where you're at. Cleavages are any divisions in society. Judicial branch is the branch or the power that interprets law. Executive executes or enforces law, and of course, legislative makes the laws. A couple of basics. Don't use the United States during the exam at all. Make sure you understand the difference between a nation, a state, a government, and a regime. Of course, know what federal versus unitary, devolution, differences between a democratic and authoritarian governments. How do countries use economics to address issues like, socialism, welfare capitalism, free markets, neoliberalism, different forms of political participation, corruption versus transparency. Know the cleavages that exist within the countries. How executives enact policy, things like cabinet members, how are they selected, the bureaucracy, checks and balances, and the idea of independent judiciaries in democratic states, and of course, social capital, that idea that, do the citizens trust the government, and what happens when that doesn't happen? Do they trust each other? Now, let's talk Britain, and remember, in Britain, it's all about gradualism. It's that gradual transition over hundreds of years into a democratic state. Let's start with what system of government, distribution of power, electoral system exists. Uh, Tell me about the Constitution, the legislative branch, who's the current prime minister, who's the current ruling party, and the major political parties. Pause here and come back. Okay, so system of government, obviously a parliamentary system of government in the UK. The distribution of power is a unitary government. Devolution occurs, of course. Electoral system is first past the post. Remember, some people think that a parliamentary system automatically implies a proportional system, and that's not true. It's first past the post. Every district, people are represented in geographic districts. The Constitution there is none, unwritten Constitution. The legislature is bicameral. You have the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The current Prime Minister is Keir Starmer. The current ruling party is Labour. And, major political parties are the Labour and the Tories, the Conservatives, and then you have other smaller regional parties. Okay, next one. Tell me what the primary cleavage is in the UK. Tell me about democratic consolidation. What is that? What is the judicial branch in the United Kingdom? What is parliamentary sovereignty? The 1980s shifted to privatization. What was that called, that time period? Who is the current leader of the Labour Party? What is collective responsibility? What ended the Troubles? And of course, every prime minister from Tony Blair to now. Who is that? Good luck. All right, pause it. We'll get back to it. Okay, now the obvious primary cleavage is your different regions: England versus Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, and how much should the different governments actually have a say. Democratic consolidation is that you have a long tradition of democracy. It's very unlikely that the country becomes more authoritarian. Let's see here. I don't know why it kicked out there. Judicial branch is the Supreme Court of the UK. Parliamentary sovereignty is that Parliament has the ultimate power regarding laws, and only Parliament can actually change their own laws. The 80s shift of privatization was under Margaret Thatcher, and so it is known as Thatcherism. Who's the current leader of the Tories? Kemi Badenoch. What is collective responsibility? That the cabinet never speaks against the prime minister publicly. What ended the Troubles is, of course, Good Friday. And then Tony Blair. And then we have Gordon Brown, David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Richie Sunak, and of course, currently Keir Starmer. A couple more things about the UK. All right. I'm locked up here. All right. A couple more things about the UK. What is the collectivist consensus? What is Brexit? What's the importance of the 2010 election? Why was it different than other elections? What are quangos? What is the primary job of the House of Lords? What is austerity? And can you give me an example of austerity taking place? Cabinet ministers in a parliamentary system are kind of in a tug of war. They have four primary jobs. What are those four jobs? What anything about Scotland that happened in the news in the last 10 years? And then two sources of authority that exist within the UK. Pause it and then come back. We'll take care of it. Okay, now, number one, collectivist consensus was in the 50s and through the 70s, and it created the welfare state, of course, especially the pride and joy of the UK, which is the National Health Service. Brexit is a vote to leave the European Union in 2016. This was done by Eurosceptics, people that didn't like the European Union. The importance of the 2010 election was when the Tories and the Liberal Democrats came together and created the first coalition government in a very long time. The Quangos are those specialized private groups that actually do work under the auspices of the government, but of course, like you know, um, BritRail, that the government doesn't really run the rail system. A Quango runs the rail system, but the government is ultimately responsible for what happens. The job of the House of Lords, of course, is suspensive veto to research things, delay legislation. Austerity is drastic cuts to government spending. You saw this currently with the NHS, and of course, in the 20 teens, the rise in tuition that created some riots. Four jobs of a cabinet member. Of course, they're responsible to the voters. They're responsible to the party to make sure that the prime minister kind of follows along what the party wants. They got to take care of whatever their position is within the cabinet, like they have a job, like dealing with foreign policy or dealing with finance, that kind of thing. And of course, they are close advisors to the prime minister, which is the number one job. Is if you're asked about cabinet members, the number one job, of course, is to advise the prime minister. Scottish Nails, Scottish News, a failed independence vote in 2015. Maybe they'll try to get it later. Probably not now with the instability in Europe. Sources of authority: democratic gradualism over time, and of course, popular sovereignty, the idea that people get to put the government into power through voting. Those are two sources of authority in the UK. Okay, now, couple things about the UK. Number one, it's all about gradualism, and this country represents advanced democracies in the AP6. It also is a well-functioning parliamentary system that works. Remember when Boris Johnson tried to prorogue Parliament, the Supreme Court steps in, takes care of business. No, the political and electoral institutions, obviously, we have an example here of rational legal authority. When their policies are effective, like creating the NHS, people are happy. When things get torn down, they're not. Legitimacy is also through that collectivist consensus time. Remember, Tony Blair did kind of a split between Thatcherism and that collectivist consensus time. Know that Thatcherism was privatization. Know the regional political parties along with the coalition in 2010. Know what's going on in Northern Ireland. Remember the Troubles and Good Friday and the backstop that happened. Issues with the European Union and Brexit, and of course Scotland's overall growing discontent. Let's move to Russia. Putin on the Ritz. Remember that Russia is all about Putin, but you have to know both the technical aspect of Russia and the reality, which Putin runs everything, but you have to know the technical parts of Russia. So tell me what the system of government is, the distribution of power. Tell us how the legislative branches are chosen or elected. When was the Constitution for Russia put in place? What is the legislative branch? Who's the current president, prime minister, ruling party, and any major political parties in Russia? Pause here and let's have a conversation. Okay, welcome back. We have a system of government. It's that hybrid presidential parliamentary system with a dual executive. Remember, the distribution of power is asymmetric federalism. And remember that asymmetric means that there are districts or regions that get much more power than others. Like if you're the region that contains Moscow is going to get a lot more than what happens way off in eastern Siberia. The electoral system in the legislative branch in the Duma is, of course, your hybrid first past the post proportional representation. You have to get at least 5% of the vote to even get into the Duma as well. The Constitution was created in 1993 for Russia. There are two branches. That is a bicameral legislature with the Duma and the Federation Council. Current president is Vladimir Putin. Current prime minister is Mikhail Mishustin. The current ruling party is United Russia, and other ones, the Communists and the Liberal Democrats. Next one about Russia. What's the judicial branch? What is near abroad? Who are Putin's secret police? Who created communism? What is a communist legislature called? What are three reforms that happened under Gorbachev? Who are all the Russian presidents? What type of executive exists in Russia? Who are the Siloviki? And what is cult of personality? Pause here, and then we'll be back. Okay, so we have the judicial branch. There are two of them. You have the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court of Russia. Near abroad is those buffer countries that exist around Russia to prevent from invasion from South Asia and Europe. That's the excuse they're using for taking them over. Putin's secret police is the FSB. Who created communism? Karl Marx. And a legislative branch in a communist country is known as the Politburo. Remember the difference between Soviet and Russian. Okay. Three different reforms: perestroika, glasnost, and democratization. Remember, perestroika is economic restructuring, becoming a little bit more privatized. Glasnost is being able to openly start to criticize and comment about government actions, and democratization's movement towards democracy. All the Russian presidents, we have Boris Yeltsin, Vladimir Putin, and Dmitry Medvedev was squeezed in there a little bit. It's a dual executive with the president and the prime minister. Remember, the Siloviki are a form of oligarchs that are the military elites. Those are the least known of the oligarchs. And a cult of personality is when the propaganda exists within a country to basically create the image of a leader as a hero, and the hero is worshipped, and it is the idealism of the country. Like the person matters more than the state. Okay, the next one we want to look, what's the largest ethnic cleavage in Russia? Give me any one element of the 2020 Russian referendum vote. What institution led the Soviet Union? Give me one negative occurrence to shock therapy. Name an opposition figure. Any opposition figure to Vladimir Putin. What is Beslan? How do I get on the Federation Council? Give me the electoral system for the executive branch. What are the presidential term limits in Russia? And give me one source of authority. Go ahead and pause, and we'll be back. Okay, largest ethnic cleavage is in Chechnya. Remember, in the Caucasus region in southern Russia. Any one of these would count for an element of the 2020 referendum. The Federation Council can remove judges. The president appoints all law enforcement. Marriage was defined between a man and a woman. You had unlimited times the president can run. Russia would be made the national language, Russian, and of course, it raised the minimum wage. What institution led the Soviet Union? Well, the Politburo. If you wanted to say the head of the party, the general secretary, remember I said institution here, and of course the general secretary heads the Politburo. What was one negative to shock therapy? Created the rise of the oligarchs. And remember, shock therapy is the transition from a Soviet socialist economy to overnight becoming free market. It also created a massive class split. A bunch of people got very poor very fast. Anyone opposition figure, Alexei Navalny is probably going to be on the top of everybody's chart. Boris Nemtsov, and then lesser known Garry Kasparov, the famous chess player, and then of course the punk feminist group Pussy Riot was also very anti-Putin. Beslan, of course, was the elementary school that got caught in the Chechen Terrorist Act, and it kind of gave an excuse for Vladimir Putin to consolidate power and start to strip away civil liberties and censor the media more. How can I get on the Federation Council? Obviously, you're chosen by regional governors, who are, of course, chosen by Vladimir Putin. Majority runoff is the electoral system at the executive level. Presidential term limits, 6-year terms, and of course, you can run as many times as you want. And a source of authority would be cult of personality and the Russian Constitution. A couple things to know about Russia. Obviously, it's about Putin. It's a former communist country. The mixed parliamentary presidential system, of course, know the political institutions, know what oligarchs are and how they influenced policy in the 1990s. Chechnya, know the issue there. Obviously, what's the role of the United Russia, how Putin over time has consolidated more control over media, civil society, the state. Remember that Boris Yeltsin once existed. Glasnost and Perestroika, the transition from Soviet to more market economy, and of course, it's a good example of authoritarianism as well. Next, let's talk about it's party time. It's China and the Chinese Communist Party. Give me the system of government, distribution of power, the electoral system that exists in China. When was the Constitution? What's the legislative branch? Who is the current head of party and the head of state? Who is the premier, the current ruling party, and any major political parties in China? Pause here, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so system of government in China is authoritarian. They are a dictatorship, obviously. Distribution of power is unitary. Electoral system, there isn't one. There aren't free and fair elections. It's an authoritarian one-party state. The Constitution was in 1982, and if you got that one right, congratulations. Well done. The legislative branch is unicameral. It's the National People's Congress. The current head of party and the head of state is President Xi Jinping. The premier is Li Keqiang. He's pretty much in the background. Current ruling party is the Communist Party, and if you think there are other major political parties, we really need to have a conversation. Now, give me the primary cleavage that exists in China. What is the dynastic social order that existed in China? What are the four pillars of Maoism? What is an SEZ? What is the largest protest in history in China? What three things need to exist for you to be called a paramount leader? What is the title of a party leader? What is the Chinese censorship program nickname? And what is the government program to maintain the people's compliance? Pause here, and we'll be right back. Okay, your primary cleavage in China is your urban versus rural. If you're an urban Chinese city dweller, you're going to be much better off than rural. That's remember the GDP per capita in China is actually quite low. It's like $12,000 to $13,000. In the United States, it's closer to 70. The old dynastic social order is Confucianism, the idea that you pledge obedience to the people above you and really help out the people below you. The four pillars of Maoism are collectivism, activism, self-reliance, and egalitarianism. Then SEZ is that special economic zone that got special tax incentives on the coasts. Your largest protest in history was held in 1989 at Tiananmen Square. The three things to be a paramount leader: you need to be the head of the military, you need to be the president, and you need to be the general secretary. The title of the party leader is always a general secretary in a communist party system. Chinese nickname for its censorship program is the Great Firewall, and of course, your social credit system is maintaining social and popular compliance. Next one. What is Deng Xiaoping known for? What are give me three primary environmental problems that exist within China? The government policy for Taiwan. What is the primary ethnic cleavage that exists in China? What institution really runs the country in China? What is Guanxi? Give me one source of authority. What are princelings? And then who actually started the Chinese Communist Party? Pause here and come back. Okay, Deng Xiaoping is bringing free markets, more privatization to China, more foreign investment, obviously. Any three major environmental problems: air pollution is obviously number one, transporting water from the south to the north where there's less of it, and then desertification, the Gobi Desert kind of moving in on China. Those are some really big problems. The one China policy that Taiwan is obviously a Chinese property, and remember that the nationalist KMT party fled to China when the Chinese Communist Party took power. The primary ethnic cleavage exists with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Institution that really runs the country is the Politburo Standing Committee. The Guanxi is the patron clientele corruption relationship that exists in China. One source of authority, of course, is the Chinese Communist Party, period. End of story. Princelings are the children of hardline commies. And then who started the CCP? Mao Zedong started the CCP. Okay. Oh, we forgot to do a parallel system. Remember, Parallel system is when the Communist Party oversees the different government branches. Okay, things to know about China. It's all about the party. It represents the communist countries in the AP6. And remember that Xi Jinping, it wasn't always this controlling. And Xi Jinping, when he came to power in the 20 teens, he basically made the Communist Party about him. Remember that there is the parallel structures of party and government. Remember that legitimacy is really driven by economic growth, even though that is starting to change as Xi Jinping gets more power hungry. The urban-rural cleavage, the patron-client relationships with Guanxi, the idea of corruption, Confucianism, Mao's rule kind of seen with a cult of personality like Xi's rule, the difference between Mao and then Deng Xiaoping, who brought more free markets, and of course, ethnic tensions in Tibet and Xinjiang. Let's talk about Iran, which is about this, trying to mix in religion and democracy. Remember that there is the institutions of the Shah, which had some elements of democratic structures going back to the old constitution. The Shah then gets more power hungry and becomes a dictator. And then you have your theocratic government that is after the revolution of Islamic Revolution in 1980, and then it becomes a theocratic, Islamic theocratic republic, quote unquote, even though it's just simply a theocratic dictatorship. Okay, what's the system of government, the distribution of power, the electoral system? When was the Constitution created? What's the legislative branch called? Who is the current head of state, head of government, current ruling party, and any major political parties? Okay, pause here when we'll come right back. Okay, the system of government is theocratic authoritarian. The distribution of power is unitary. Remember the electoral system to get in the legislative branch is first past the post, but you got to get 25% of the vote or you'll have a runoff election later. There are two constitutions. You have the 1906 Constitution that creates things like the Majlis, like the presidency, like the cabinet, and then you have the 1979 Constitution that creates the Office of the Supreme Leader, the Assembly of Experts, the Guardian Council, all those not elected and elected positions that deal with the Supreme Leader and Islam. If you, by the way, said 1980 would be the Constitution, you'd be perfectly fine on the exam. There is one legislative branch that is the Majlis. The current head of state is Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. The current head of government is Masoud Pezeshkian, that is the president. The current ruling party are conservatives. Okay, the current ruling party are conservatives within the, places like the Guardian Council and the Majlis, even though Masoud Pezeshkian is more reformist. And then, of course, the major political parties don't really exist. It's conservatives versus reformists. All right, what's the difference between Sunni and Shia Islam? What is a rentier state? What is the name of the former supreme leader? What year was the Islamic Revolution? What is Vilayat-e Faqih? What electoral system deals with the executive branch? What is a hijab? Who chooses the Guardian Council? What war occurred during the 1980s? And give me one hidden nation in Iran. Pause here, and we'll be right back. Okay, we have the two different sects of Islam. Remember that Sunni is 90% and Shia is about 10% around the world, and Shia is big in Iran. Remember, a rentier state usually have a state getting its income from a single commodity. In our case, it's usually oil, a natural resource. Former supreme leader is Ruhollah Khomeini. The year of the Islamic Revolution, 1979, 1980. Remember that Vilayat-e Faqih is that clerics have ultimate authority, not any kind of like the Majlis or president. Electoral system for the executive's majority runoff. A hijab is a required female headscarf. Choosing the Guardian Council is half the supreme leader and half the head of the judiciary. Be careful with this one. It's often people just say the supreme leader, and it's not correct. The war in the 80s was Iran and Iraq, and one hidden nation would be the Kurds in Kurdistan. Tell me what the importance of 1953 is. Who chooses the supreme leader? Give me one hardline president and one reformist. What's the number one job of the Guardian Council? Who is Neda Sultan? Who selects the assembly of experts? Technically, what two institutions can create laws? What document gives the president authority, and what document gives the supreme leader authority? Pause here. We'll be right back. Okay, remember 1953 is Mohammad Mossadegh taking power by an election, and the CIA and MI6 of the US and UK overthrows Mossadegh and puts the Shah back into power. This is why Iran does not like the United States. Who chooses the supreme leader? Well, the Assembly of Experts does. Give me one hardline president. Ibrahim Raisi, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, very hard line. Reformists, Muhammad Khatami, Hashemi Rafsanjani, Mir Hussein Mousavi, and then Pezeshkian would also be considered a reformist president as well. The Guardian Council's number one job is to vet candidates to make sure that they are Muslim, quote unquote, enough to be put onto the ballot. Netta was known as like a symbol of the 2009 Green Revolution regarding Ahmadinejad's election. Who selects the Assembly of Experts? Well, the voters do. They're directly elected by the people. Of course, remember that the ballot is vetted by the Guardian Council. Technically, what institutions can create laws? The Majlis is the official the official legislative branch. Expediency Council is also right up there. Super secret, but technically they can create laws. What document gives the president the authority? The 1906 Constitution, and of course, what document gives the supreme leader authority is the Quran. Iran, it's all about religion and democracy. It represents a theocratic government in the AP6. Know all the political and electoral institutions. Know the impact of the Iranian Revolution on current Iranian society and politics. Obviously, the jurist guardianship is represented through the Guardian Council saying, like, are you Muslim enough to be a law or to run an election? Remember, this is a rentier state that Shia Islam has a huge amount of sway in what goes on. The difference between Sharia law and secular law, remember that Sharia is the living a divine life. Remember that you need to know what the Assembly of Experts does, the Expediency Council does, and the Guardian Council does. The different factions of the political and theocratic elites, reformists versus conservatives, the election of 2009 and its problems, and then, of course, the economic conditions within the country with like US sanctions and that kind of thing. All right, and that is Iran. All right, let's do Nigeria. Remember, this is all about cleavages. Okay, all about cleavages. So what's the system of government, the distribution of power? What's the legislative, how do you get elected to the legislative system? When was the Constitution enacted? When was the legislative branch? I'm sorry, what is the name of the legislative branch? Who is the current head of state, head of government, the current ruling party, and the major political parties? Pause here, and then we'll be back. Okay, the system of government is a presidential system. We have a distribution of power is federal. We have a federal republic of Nigeria. The electoral system for the legislative branch is first past the post. The Constitution was done in 1999. Remember that the Constitution, flipped the regime. The legislature is bicameral. It's called the National Assembly. It's filled with the Senate and the House of Representatives. The current head of state is Bola Tinubu, the president. He is also the head of government. The current ruling party is the APC, the All Progressives Congress. Yes, you could put APC, you'd be perfectly fine. The People's Democratic Party and the All Progressive Congress are the major political parties. Now, tell me, what is a period of democracy called in Nigeria? What is Biafra? Ibrahim Babangida and Sani Abacha, who are they? What's the little quirk in the cabinet? What are Mossab or Mend? Any of those things? Or Mossab would be a same thing, but in a different region. What's the judicial branch? What's the difference between coded law and common law? What is electoral system for the executive? Be careful with that one. And finally, what is SARS? All right, pause here. We'll be back. Okay, a period of democracy is called a republic, and we are currently in the fourth republic in Nigeria. Biafra is a breakaway Igbo state. That's where Mossab would be. That's the organization that wants to break away. Babangida and Abacha are authoritarians or military generals pre-1999. Remember, the cabinet quirk is called Federal character. It must have one member from all 36 states in the cabinet to make things diverse. MOSOP or MEND, these are those Niger Delta groups that want to break away and become independent. Ogoni is the native tribe to that particular region. You say Ija, you would be perfectly fine. Judicial branch is the Supreme Court of Nigeria. Coded law is the law that is written down. Common law is based on precedent, which is past cases. Electoral system is first past the post, but remember, you must get 25% in 2/3 of the states. And remember, SARS is that anti-corruption police task force that abused power. All right. Now tell me what Good Luck Jonathan is known for. What is prebendelism? Give me the 4 tribes. What is Boko Haram? What's the difference between Lagos and Abuja? Give me one source of authority prior to 99 and one source of authority after 1999. What was one solution to try to calm the terrorist actions or freedom fighter actions, depending on how you look at it, in the Niger Delta? What's the law in the North? And give me every president back to 1999. Tough one, but I know you're up for it. Pause here. We'll be back. Okay, Good Luck Jonathan, of course, is a president. He is also known for rampant corruption. Prebendelism is patron clientelism, corruption based on ethnic groups, helping your own ethnicity above all else. The 4 tribes are the Yoruba, the Igbo, Hausa Fulani, and Ija, the 4 primary tribes. Boko Haram is a Muslim fundamentalist group in northeast Nigeria that's against Western involvement. Remember, Lagos is the commercial capital of basically all of Africa. Horrible infrastructure, massive problems. And Abuja is the political capital in central Nigeria. It is very good infrastructure. It's like an example of blatant corruption because where the politicians are, everything's really nice. Where the commercial economic investment needs to be is a mess. Source of authority pre 1999 is the authoritarian. Basically, the authoritarian has the guns and they have the authority. Post-Constitution, or post-1999 is Constitution, of course, and voting, popular sovereignty, the power being with the people. Some couple of things that in the Niger Delta, obviously trying to develop it, create more economic growth with the Niger Delta Development Commission, trying to do gun buybacks and giving people more opportunities through political organizations to express desires for independence in MEND. Northern law, of course, is Sharia law. And then the presidents going backwards from now to 99, Bola Tinubu, Muhammadu Buhari, Good Luck Jonathan, Yara Adua, and Olusegun Obasanjo. Okay, remember Nigeria is all about cleavages. It's all the ethnic politics ramped up times 3. Much, much, much more divisive than other countries. It's a less industrialized former colonial power, and we're talking about like colonial powers up until 1960 when they got independence. It is a political and electoral. A lot of the ethnicities are within the political and electoral system, so know them. The problems in the Niger Delta with oil, obviously a rentier state. The idea of a national question, is it a country or is it just a bunch of nations that are trying to get along? Federal character, that whole cabinet issue, the impact of British colonialism on anger from the North and the South, the impact of oil and the corruption, obviously prebendelism. The fact that Good Luck Jonathan actually stepped down willingly and you didn't have massive fighting, and then Boko Haram, things to know. Last country is going to be Mexico. And remember, Mexico is all about becoming a more democratic state from being an authoritarian country. Okay. So what's the system of government, distribution of power, the legislative electoral system? When was the Constitution created? What's the name of the legislative branch? Who's the current head of state, head of government, current ruling party, and any major political parties? Pause here, and we'll be right back. Okay. System of government is presidential. Distribution of power is a federal system. The electoral system is mixed first past the post and proportional representation in both the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies. The Constitution was 1907, and as I stated, the legislative branch is bicameral, the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate. The current head of state and head of government is Claudia Sheinbaum. She is a member of the Morena political party, and major political parties otherwise are PAN, which is right of center, and the PRI, which is more left of center. Morena kind of fills that void, taking a lot of those PRI votes, though. Okay, next one. What is NAFTA? Why was Vicente Fox so important? Give me one source of authority pre 2000 and one post 2000. What is the IFE or INE? What is sexenio? Why was Felipe Calderon so unpopular? How did the PRI maintain their power for so long? What is import substitution? And one reform from Lázaro Cárdenas. Pause here, and we'll be right back. Okay, so NAFTA is the free trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico in 1993 that almost caused a small civil war in Mexico and created the uprising in Chiapas. Why is Vicente Fox so important? Because he broke the PRI's hold on government in the 2000 election and became the first candidate not from the PRI since the 1930s. Pre 2000, authority came from the PRI. It was a one party state. They ran things through sham elections. And then, of course, post 2000, it's the constitutional order, and then, of course, elections, multi party elections, popular sovereignty. The IFE-INE is the Federal Electoral Institute, which is supposed to manage free and fair elections. And remember that Morena has attempted to basically get rid of its independence to try to sway elections. Sexenio is that 1 6-year presidential non-re-elect. Remember that Felipe Calderon was very unpopular because of his war on drugs and his attempts to privatize Pemex, the parastatal for the oil company. PRI maintained through electoral fraud. Import substitution is basically gutting the ability to engage in international trade and focusing on supporting domestic industry. Normally, it really, really is a failure. It helped cause the Mexican miracle in the 1950s and 60s, and then started to wane as free trade started to grow in the 1980s. One reform from Lázaro Cárdenas, obviously land reform, trying to give more land through ejidos to peasants. Sexenio, that 1 6-year term, he nationalized and created Pemex. He promoted unions, and he really instituted the import substitution system. All right. What's the religious majority in Mexico? Give me 2 revolutionary leaders. What is the known Mexican parastatal? What's that system in which interest groups are co-opted to formulate policy? What is that system called? One result of NAFTA. What's the judiciary called? What is a maquiladora? What is the primary ethnic cleavage in Mexico? And who makes the best Mexican food? I'll pause here, and we'll be right back. Okay, religious majority is obviously Catholic. 80% of Mexicans are Catholic, though it is becoming less like fundamentalist. Catholicism is kind of waning. 2 revolutionary leaders are Emilio Zapata and Pancho Villa. Villa from the north, Zapata from the south. The Mexican parastatal is known as Pemex. What is the system in where interest groups are co-opted to help formulate policy? That is corporatism. Mexico is a very corporatist, corrupt country. A couple of results from NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Obviously, the Zapatista rebellion in the mid-1990s. The North became much wealthier. The South became poorer and did not catch up. You have the Maquiladora Special Economic Zone along the border that got factories really pumping out goods and services for the United States. And you had a significant immigration from southern Mexico to northern Mexico for better economic conditions. The judiciary is the Mexican Supreme Court. A maquiladora is, again, that factory special economic zone along the U.S. border. The primary ethnic cleavage in this country is the mestizo Spanish/indigenous mix that came together versus the indigenous Mexicans primarily in southern Mexico. And of course, come on, who makes the best Mexican food? I mean, if the answer isn't mom or grandma or great grandma or whoever the matriarch of the family is, then you're just missing out on what's real. Remember Mexico. It's all about becoming democratic, a struggling new democracy that started in the year 2000. It represents this newly industrialized country within the AP6. There's not a whole lot of reason why Mexico can't be like China in terms of economic growth, except that their government can't stop tripping over their own feet. It was an evolved one-party state and then switched over in 2000. Know the electoral systems and political institutions. Know the impact of the Mexican Revolution on kind of the mind and politics of the Mexican people. Drug trade, the cartels are obviously significant. The idea that the state is often manipulates interest groups and non-governmental organizations to fit their needs. A lot of different protests, corruption, the teachers' protest, femicide movement, Maquiladora zone, Sexenio, the difference between the North and the South, NAFTA, the rise of Morena and Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, and of course the dependency theory, the idea that Mexico is somehow connected to the United States and beholden to, those poor countries are beholden to more wealthier countries. Is it more that they are beholden or are they connected? Who knows? That is your review of the AP6 countries. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know.